Hello there everyone, in today's video we're going to take a look at the new SDLT rates that came into force in the UK at the start of this month, April 2025. So let's just dive straight in. Residential rates, so you're buying a residential property. What SDLT are you going to pay? Well, if the property is less than £125,000, you're going to pay zero. Now, first of all, we're going to assume, when we say we're going to assume that this is your only property, it's your main residence, you haven't got any other properties, so what are you going to pay? Up to 125,000, 0%. Now, remember in the UK, it's on a slice system, so if the property is more than 125,000, you still get the first 125 grand at 0%, but then the next banding from 125 to 250, that is 2%. All right? And then if the property is between 250,000 all the way up to 925,000, on that slice, if you will, tax rate 5%. So some at 0, some at 2, some at 5, and then the property in excess of 925 grand up to 1.5 million, that's 10% SDLT. Now, if it's greater than 1.5 million, the purchase price of this residential property, your only property, 12% SDLT. Okay, so what if it's not your only property, or you've already got a property, this is a second property, or this is a property that you are acquiring through a limited company? In those situations, the government slap on what they call a surcharge to the normal rates that we've just gone through, and that surcharge is 5%. So across all the bands. So same scenario, you're buying a property, but let's say you've already got a main resident, you are now buying a buy-to-let property. So on that first slice up to 125,000, 5% it's SDLT, not 0%. And then in the band 125 to 250, 7%, not 2%. So 5% is being added on in each of the bands. So let's just crunch the numbers. So assuming you have got buy-to-let property that you're acquiring this week, middle of April 2025, and it costs 300,000, but you've already got your principal private residence, your main residence that you live in. This is a buy-to-let, your first foray, if you will, into being a landlord. Right, what about SDLT? How much are you going to pay? Well, 300,000. What have we already said? 0 to 125,000. That's the first band you need to worry about. Because it's your second property, it's not your main residence, 5%. 125,000 at 5%. But remember, we do it in slices. So the next slice is between 125 and 250, which is another 125 grand, but this time it's at 7%. 125,000 at 7%. The property cost 300 grand, so how much have we got left in the next band? Well, the next band that goes from 250 grand upwards, 50 grand to get us to 300,000. And that SDLT rate, 10%. So boom, 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 300,000, 20 grand of SDLT. So £20,000 SDLT to acquire a £300,000 buy-to-let property. All right, now, what if, let's just compare, assuming we're in this scenario, column A, if you will, where you haven't got any other properties, you've sold your main residence, you're buying another one for 300,000, what SDLT would you pay? Well, we use these numbers, so it's 125,000 at 0, the next 125,000 at 2, and the next 50 grand at only 5. That's a 5 grand SDLT bill. So the government is penalising you for being a landlord to the tune of £15,000. You would have paid 5 grand of SDLT had it been your main residence that you were getting another one. But it's a second property, it's a buy-to-let property, 20 grand. That's a 15 grand hike. The same cost, remember, 300 grand, just because them's the rules on second properties. Yikes. All right, food for thought. So do your costings. For goodness sake, when you're planning, I'm going to get into the property rental business, well, just make sure you factor in the SDLT, because that is a big whack. What about non-resi? So, non-resi, or otherwise known as commercial. Commercial rates have always been more favourable than residential rates. So, the first 150,000 for commercial is taxed at zero. Just a little compare and contrast. For resi, it was 125 at zero for the sold property. Commercial, 0%. Then we go from 150 to 250. 2% in that slice, in that band. In excess of 250k for a commercial property, 5% SDLT. So it's a lot more better if you acquire a commercial property over a residential property. Now, for goodness sake, be careful on the so-called mixed use properties, because there is a rule that says, okay, well, what if the property that I'm buying has a bit of resi and a bit of non-resi in the same building? Well, the default position in that situation is that you go with the non-resi rates, the commercial rates. That's the law. If it's got a bit of both, you go with the commercial rates. Oh, well, that's great, because that's cheaper. So what a lot of people have been doing is looking at exactly what they've been buying and saying, oh, hang on a minute, maybe what I thought was resi actually qualifies as mixed use. I shouldn't have paid all that SDLT. I'll try and get a refund. And people have been claiming refunds for thousands, or trying to. And HMRC is obviously all over this because it's an outflow of cash for them. So what sort of things are at issue? Well, typically, if you've got a decent bit of land on your resi property that you're buying, and you say, okay, well, yeah, maybe there's a bit of room here for some horse grazing, a paddock, some sort of, commercial activity, we could do that. HMRC have been right all over that, saying, come on, in good commerciality, what, just because you've got your own horse in the back garden, that ain't going to fly. But you can see where anything in the tax world where there's a tax break, and if you do certain things one way, it's going to be a lot cheaper than the other way. People are going to try it on, of course they are. But, just be careful, because if you try it on and it doesn't work, not only will you have to pay the higher rate, you'll get hit for penalties and interest and goodness knows what. So, things like the paddock thing, apparently there's been hundreds of these sorts of claims, most of them being shot out by HMRC. Things like, if you're buying let's say you got a shop and it's got a flat above it in one land registry title, one building. Yes, that is a genuine mixed use building. You've got a shop and you've got a flat. But there's all sorts of convoluted ways to try and get around paying resi when there's a slight inkling, a whiff of non-resi being present. And there's all sorts of scamsters out there who will get in touch with people because they've got land registry details. We'll call them up and say, did you know you probably paid too much SDLT? You can get a refund because you've actually got a mixed use property, not a resi property. And it can all fall apart from there. So for goodness sake, be careful. Watch out for scammers. People calling you up. Speak to a tax professional. For goodness sake, do yourself a favour. So, overview there. New SDLT rates in force in the UK from April 2025. If you like this video, please do subscribe. And as always, I'll see you soon.